In 1960, a 25-year-old factory worker in Birmingham earning the average wage could save up diligently for just 3 years and buy a house. It was a time when homeownership was within reach for the working class, a symbol of stability, a foundation for future generations. The dream of owning a home didn't feel like a distant fantasy, but rather a tangible goal, a rite of passage into adulthood and security. Fast forward to 2025. Picture now a 25-year-old graduate in Birmingham, educated, ambitious, working hard, earning the average salary. But the landscape they face is staggeringly different. To amass enough for a deposit on a modest home, they would need to save every single penny of their take-home pay for 11 years. 11 years. 11 years without spending a single pound on rent, food, transport, clothing, or the inevitable emergencies life throws at you. That figure isn't a sensationalist exaggeration or a rounding error. It is the harsh reality, grounded in data from the Land Registry and the Office for National Statistics. This statistic stands as perhaps the most brutal indicator of the seismic shifts that have reshaped British society over the last 60 years. It is a measure not just of economics, but of hope deferred, futures delayed, dreams deferred. The average UK house price today stands at approximately £290,000, while the average full-time salary hovers around £35,000. This means the house price-to-income ratio has crept past 8 times annual earnings, a figure unprecedented in recorded British history. To put that into perspective, it eclipses levels seen during the Victorian era, a time marked by rapid urban expansion and industrial upheaval. It surpasses the post-World War II boom, when the country was rebuilding itself from the ruins and offering a new social contract. Throughout the last century, housing was less unaffordable than it is today. The tragic irony is that the people most devastated are not the very poorest in society. Those at the bottom tier often qualify for social housing or welfare assistance. No, the harshest blow falls upon the so-called squeezed middle, the heart of the workforce. Graduates, nurses, teachers, junior engineers, and countless others. These are the individuals who earn too much to be eligible for support but too little to ever reach the finish line of homeownership. They embody a vast and growing middle ground left stranded between opportunity and austerity. This video will take you on a journey to understand how Britain arrived at this juncture. We will uncover the political decisions and economic shifts that have gradually, relentlessly, tightened the noose on affordable housing. We will meet the people who have profited in this system and the many more who have paid the price with their futures. And importantly, we will explore why, in spite of repeated promises by successive governments from across the political spectrum, almost nothing has been done to stem this tide. Because this isn't a story about a sudden market crash or an accidental failure of supply and demand. It's a story about a system designed with intent. A system that functions precisely as those who constructed it intended, to generate profits for some, while locking many others out of access to one of the most basic human needs, a place to call home. Let's start with the raw facts, because the scale of this crisis is genuinely difficult to grasp without seeing the numbers laid out clearly. In England, the average house price is now 8.6 times average household income, according to the ONS. In the 1990s, the ratio hovered around 3 or 4 times income. Across Wales, the figure is slightly lower, around 5.8 times, while in Scotland, it's 5.6 times. These numbers already suggest a steep challenge. But when you turn your gaze to London and the Southeast, where the majority of jobs, opportunities, and indeed young people are clustered, the situation becomes even more dire. Here, the ratio climbs steeply, skyrocketing to between 10 and 12 times an average income. And in certain boroughs of London, this ratio eclipses 15 times income. Imagine that for a moment. A household earning the average London salary, around £42,000 a year, would have to dedicate every single penny of their income, without spending a dime on anything else, for 15 long years just to afford an average home in parts of the capital. No food, no transport, no bills, just saving. It's a scale of hardship that's hard to fathom, but this is the reality for thousands of Londoners, and an increasingly significant number elsewhere in the Southeast. This has profound ripple effects on the life trajectory of young people. The average age of first-time buyers in Britain has climbed steadily, reaching 33 years old in 2024, the highest in over 20 years. This is a sharp rise from the early 2000s when first buyers were typically around 29, and an even starker contrast to the 1960s and 70s, when many secured their first home in their early to mid-20s. Buying a first home was once a marker of youthful independence. Today, it is something that many achieve, if they achieve it at all, well into their 30s and often only with substantial financial support. That financial support often comes through what is colloquially known as the bank of mom and dad. This informal lender has grown into a major force in Britain's housing finance. In 2023 alone, parents contributing gifts or loans to help their children buy homes poured approximately £9 billion into the market. This phenomenon quietly reveals the stark reality of intergenerational wealth transfer through housing. Those who have parents owning property can lean on that safety net, stepping onto the property ladder with a helping hand. But for those without such parental assets, the odds are mercilessly stacked against them. A systemic barrier that compounds disadvantages and deepens inequality over a lifetime. For those who can't buy, the rental market offers no refuge. Instead, it presents its own crisis. UK rents reached record highs in 2024. Outside London, the average monthly rent exceeded £1,200, nearly double what it was just a decade ago. In London, the situation is even bleaker, with average rents soaring past £2,600 per month. The ONS registered rent inflation in London at a staggering 11.5% for 2024 alone. For countless renters, paying upwards of £1,500 each month on rent makes saving for a deposit an almost insurmountable challenge. The very prospect of homeownership slips further into the distance. Here is perhaps the most quietly devastating statistic. The average deposit required for a first-time buyer across the UK in 2025 was £61,090. To fully comprehend what that means for a typical young adult earning the median UK salary, consider this: saving 20% of take-home pay every month for over a decade would be necessary just to accumulate that deposit. All this while simultaneously paying rent and managing the costs of everyday living. The financial juggling act required leaves little room for anything else: education, childcare, emergencies, or simply living a stable life. The mathematics of homeownership in Britain today are not just difficult, they are, for a significant portion of the population, fundamentally broken. It's a labyrinthine puzzle where the pieces are deliberately shifting and scarce. Technology, social mobility, and opportunities have advanced rapidly in many areas, but in housing, the system seems frozen or worse, regressing. But this crisis was not inevitable. It represents a dramatic departure from the recent past. To truly grasp how we arrived at this juncture, we must travel back in time, back to the 1970s and earlier, when Britain boasted one of the most extensive and generous social housing systems in the developed world. Back then, housing was not just a commodity for the wealthy, it was recognized as a fundamental human need and a right. Strong government intervention ensured affordable homes for millions, creating stability and opportunity. Unfortunately, that model began to unravel in the decades that followed. To understand the scale of what has been lost, you need to understand what Britain once had. In the years immediately following the Second World War, Britain embarked on one of the most ambitious social housing programs in the world. The country lay scarred and exhausted, bombed-out cities, overcrowded slums, and millions of families living in conditions that were, by any measure, unacceptable. The government's response was not to leave housing to the market. It was to build. Between 1945 and 1980, successive governments, Labour and Conservative alike, constructed over 4 million council homes. At the peak of this effort, in 1968, Britain built over 400,000 new homes in a single year. These were not temporary fixes or emergency shelters. They were permanent, well-built homes with gardens, indoor plumbing, and central heating, homes that gave working-class families a quality of life that many had never previously experienced. The philosophy behind this effort was simple but profound. Housing was not a commodity to be bought and sold for profit. It was a public good, as essential to a functioning society as schools and hospitals. The state had a duty to ensure that every citizen, regardless of income, had access to a decent, secure, affordable home. The estates that emerged from this era were not the grim, neglected tower blocks of popular imagination. Many were thoughtfully designed, with green spaces, community facilities, and intermingled streets. In these communities, social divisions were softened, and a new kind of collective identity blossomed, one rooted in mutual respect and shared destiny. By the late 1970s, social housing stock accounted for nearly 1/3 of all UK households, providing affordable and secure homes to millions. Although waiting lists existed, they were manageable. Families of modest means, particularly young working-class couples, could expect to access social housing without debilitating delays. The rents were set significantly below market levels, and tenants enjoyed security of tenure, a stability that allowed them to put down roots, raise children, and build lives without the continual fear of eviction. At the same time, the prospect of homeownership was within reach for many. In 1970, the average UK house cost around 3.5 times the average annual wage, a ratio that made mortgage repayment possible for a working family on a single income. Young individuals and couples could realistically aspire to buy modest terraced houses in industrial towns and suburban areas alike. Interest rates during this period were indeed higher than today, at times reaching into double digits. But the higher borrowing costs were offset by the abundance of housing supply and a thriving social housing safety net. Crucially, wages were rising steadily. Between 1950 and 1980, real wages in Britain approximately doubled, a pace of growth that met or exceeded the rate of inflation and outstripped the rising cost of housing. This created a dynamic where stable employment, secure housing, and growing prosperity reinforced one another. For many working-class families, the journey out of poverty was tangible and attainable. The home became a symbol not only of financial security, but of social advancement, a place where one's children could grow up without the constant specter of overcrowding or homelessness. Of course, the system was far from flawless. Discrimination did mar allocations. Minority groups and marginalized communities frequently faced barriers. Some estates suffered from poor planning. The quality of construction varied. Yet, despite these challenges, a core principle remained almost universally accepted across the political spectrum. The state bore a duty to guarantee affordable, decent housing for its citizens. Then came 1979 and the election of Margaret Thatcher, a moment that irrevocably altered this consensus. Her government viewed public housing and its associated spending as an inefficient burden on the state and a distortion of market principles. The introduction of the right to buy scheme in 1980 marked a turning point, fundamentally reshaping the provision of social housing. While it empowered many council tenants to purchase their homes, it simultaneously depleted the stock of affordable rental properties that had been the bedrock of working-class security for decades. The consequences of this shift have reverberated for over 4 decades. The steady erosion of social housing stock, coupled with policies that favored homeownership without adequate supply, created strains that current generations are now struggling to overcome. Understanding this history is crucial. It reveals not just a series of policy decisions, but a fundamental shift in the relationship between the state, the market, and the citizen. A nation that once took collective responsibility for housing has, over time, retreated from that commitment, with profound consequences for millions of lives today. On the 8th of October 1980, Margaret Thatcher's Housing Act came into force. It contained a provision that would, over the following 4 decades, fundamentally reshape the landscape of British housing. It was called the right to buy. The policy was, on its surface, simple and appealing. Council tenants who had lived in their homes for a minimum number of years were given the legal right to purchase their property, at a significant discount of up to 50% below market value. For millions of working-class families who had rented from the council their entire lives, this was a genuine opportunity. The chance to own the home they had lived in for years, to build equity, to have something to pass on to their children. And for many, it worked. Between 1980 and 1990, Thatcher's government oversaw the sale of approximately 1.34 million council homes, homes that had been part of the public housing stock for decades. Families who had never imagined owning property became homeowners. It was, for those individuals, a transformative moment. But the policy contained a fatal flaw that would only become painfully clear with time. The one group that right to buy ultimately failed, indeed almost systematically excluded, was the future generation of social housing applicants. Those in desperate need of affordable housing found their options shrinking as the years passed. In return for selling these homes, local councils were permitted to keep a limited portion of the proceeds. However, there was a crucial caveat. Central government forbade these councils from using the money to build new social housing. The policy was explicit. The stock of social housing was meant to decline, not be replenished. This was a deliberate choice underpinning the ideological shift towards privatization and market-driven housing solutions. The outcome was stark. Where once councils had been building more than 80,000 new homes annually to meet demand, completions plummeted to under 20,000 a year during the 1980s. While councils were selling at a rapid pace, the construction of replacement homes all but ground to a halt. In practical terms, the social housing stock was not just shrinking, it was being hollowed out. The homes that had been sold transitioned into private ownership, predominantly by the original tenants. Many owned their homes outright for years, turning a public asset into a personal one. However, the landscape shifted again in the mid-1990s, most notably with the introduction of buy-to-let mortgages in 1996. This financial innovation triggered the rise of a robust private rental sector, and many of the former council homes began circulating within it. Research conducted by Inside Housing reveals some startling facts. Over 40% of homes sold under the right to buy scheme since its inception are now rented out by private landlords. These properties, once public assets built to provide affordable, secure housing, have become investment vehicles, commodities in a sprawling rental market, often priced beyond the reach of low-income renters. Ironically, the very councils that sold these homes at a deep discount are now forced to turn around and rent them back, paying private landlords to house homeless families displaced by the shrinking social housing stock. In London and other urban centers, this has led to situations where councils are paying exorbitant sums to repurchase the very homes they sold, sometimes at prices 6 times higher than the original sale price. A detailed analysis by the Commonwealth think tank has estimated the total cost to taxpayers over the course of the right to buy scheme to be nearly £200 billion. A £200 billion transfer of wealth, moving public property into private hands, much of which is now leveraged for rental income, often extracting funds from the poorest residents. This was not merely a transfer of assets, it was a seismic shift in the UK housing model. A generation of working-class Britons secured homeownership, yes, but at the expense of future generations who now find themselves locked out of affordable social housing entirely. The supply crisis birthed by right to buy has festered for nearly half a century. The current government's ambitious target, to build 300,000 new homes annually, remains unfulfilled. Not a single year in the past 30 has met this goal. Between April 2024 and March 2025, England delivered only 199,300 net additional homes, less than 2/3 of the stated target. Each year, the deficit grows, deepening the crisis seeded by policies such as right to buy. If the right to buy scheme of the 1980s fanned the flames of the UK's housing turmoil, the introduction of the buy-to-let mortgage in 1996 was the inferno that engulfed the market entirely. This financial innovation didn't just reshape the landscape. It redrew the very rules of ownership and investment in housing, triggering profound and lasting consequences still felt today across the country. In 1996, a consortium of mortgage lenders, working closely with the Association of Residential Letting Agents, unveiled a financial product unlike any before it. A mortgage designed exclusively for investors seeking to purchase property to rent out. This buy-to-let mortgage was groundbreaking. Unlike traditional mortgages, which required borrowers to demonstrate their personal income to secure a loan, buy-to-let lenders based their decisions primarily on expected rental income from the property itself. Suddenly, bricks and mortar became a source of leveraged capital on its own merit, independent from the borrower's salary or job security. This subtle shift was a quiet revolution with explosive effects. Before the advent of buy-to-let mortgages, private landlords in the UK numbered around 500,000, a minority in the housing market, often small-scale and localized. But by 2012, this figure had quadrupled to 2 million. The buy-to-let sector, which barely registered as a distinct market in the mid-1990s, burgeoned into a colossal £300 billion asset class in less than 2 decades, accounting for roughly a quarter of all private rented homes in the country. What powered this rapid expansion was not just the lending system itself, but a tax regime that heavily favored landlords. Mortgage interest payments, costs that consumed a significant portion of rental income, could be offset against taxable income. While ordinary homeowners were taxed on their mortgage interest payments with no relief, landlords could deduct these expenses wholesale before calculating their tax liabilities. This created an artificial subsidy within the tax code, funneling public money into supporting property investment rather than homeownership. Moreover, when landlords sold their properties, they benefited from capital gains tax rates lower than ordinary income tax, sometimes half the rate paid by workers on their earnings. Beyond this, landlords could write off a broad range of expenses: maintenance work, letting agent fees, insurance, and even advertising costs against their taxable income. Collectively, these policies created a system in which being a landlord was not simply profitable. It was fiscally incentivized by the state. The effects of these incentives and new lending rules rippled through the housing market with predictable ferocity. Properties that might once have been within reach for first-time buyers in their 20s or 30s, young families hoping to settle, apprentices starting out, were increasingly snapped up by investors armed with cheap, leveraged capital. This dynamic intensified the competition for homes, driving prices steadily upward. In vibrant cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and parts of London, entire neighborhoods that had been predominantly owner-occupied for generations began to shift under this pressure. Rows of terraced houses and modest flats, once home to working-class families, were quietly transformed into rental portfolios controlled by absentee landlords. Home ownership, long a cornerstone of social mobility and personal stability, was replaced by tenancy, subject to the fluctuations of a market increasingly dominated by investment logic. The economics of this transformation became self-reinforcing, a feedback loop that escalated the crisis. As more investors entered the market chasing buy-to-let returns, demand pushed house prices higher. Rising prices drove rental yields to remain attractive, encouraging even more investment. This intensified competition locked out first-time buyers who could no longer compete with landlords leveraging multiple mortgages across properties. The result was more renters in the market, which made buy-to-let investments even more profitable and further propelled house prices upwards. This cycle, this wealth-extracting loop, effectively siphoned money from those who do not own property to those who do, compounding existing inequalities. It is a process that has quietly but relentlessly continued for nearly 30 years, reshaping the social and economic fabric of communities across the United Kingdom. Data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the stark scale of this shift. Between 1999 and 2025, house prices in the UK increased at roughly twice the rate of household incomes. Over the last half-century, property values have soared by over 2,300%, while wages have climbed by approximately 1,400%. For first-time buyers locked out by soaring prices, these numbers depict an ever higher barrier to entry, a wall growing taller with each passing year. In the years that ticked by after the shockwaves of the 2008 financial crisis reverberated around the world, an unusual current began flowing beneath the surface of London's iconic skyline. While economies across the West wrestled with recession and uncertainty, a different story was quietly unfolding in the city's property market, one marked by a dramatic influx of foreign capital. Investors from Russia, China, the Gulf states, and Southeast Asia converged on London's real estate with a voracious appetite, transforming prime properties into coveted commodities on a global scale. This influx was not merely a coincidence of timing, but a confluence of circumstances, financial, political, and personal. London, with its storied reputation as a global financial hub, offered a sanctuary for wealth amidst market volatility. Housing, particularly in sought-after locations like Kensington, Chelsea, and Mayfair, stood as a symbol of stability. Property in this city was, and still is, seen as a solid investment, appreciating steadily in value while sheltered by the United Kingdom's robust legal system and political stability. But beyond financial considerations lay a deeper allure. For many foreign buyers, the appeal of London property was not just about capital preservation or profit. It was about invisibility, a cloak of anonymity that money cannot always afford elsewhere. The ability to purchase through offshore shell companies allowed these buyers to step away from the public eye, shielding their identities, and sometimes their darker motives, behind layers of corporate secrecy. In many cases, these were not just investments. They were safe havens, symbols of influence, or even instruments of money laundering. By 2016, these trends were impossible to ignore. A landmark investigation by Transparency International revealed a startling statistic: 60% of new-build luxury flats in London had been snapped up by foreign buyers, a significant number of them through offshore entities registered in notorious tax havens such as the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, and Panama. These jurisdictions offered a veil of secrecy and the benefit of minimal tax obligations, making them the perfect vehicles for the wealthiest global players to park their money. Then came the Pandora Papers in 2021, a seismic leak of nearly 12 million financial documents that peeled back the layers of secrecy surrounding the global offshore economy. The revelations were stark and comprehensive, exposing a sprawling network of shell companies and trusts used by politicians, oligarchs, and billionaires from every corner of the globe to conceal vast fortunes, and in many cases to own swathes of prime London real estate. Among the names disclosed were some of the highest echelons of global power: the King of Jordan, whose palace holdings in London raised eyebrows; associates of Azerbaijan's president, whose wealth flowed into upscale London developments; former politicians turned oligarchs; and shadowy figures whose investments were shielded by layers of nominee owners and offshore trusts. These weren't just wealthy individuals choosing to invest abroad. In many cases, they were using London bricks and mortar as instruments of influence, security, and sometimes corruption. According to data from the Land Registry, since 1999, over 100,000 homes in the UK have been bought by overseas companies. Many of these properties are left to gather dust, empty, unoccupied, disconnected from everyday life. In 2023, England alone had nearly 1 million empty homes, standing silent and unused, while more than 1.2 million households languished on social housing waiting lists, desperate for a place to call home. This stark juxtaposition, millions homeless or waiting mere streets away from homes no one lives in, paints a bleak portrait of systemic failure. In an attempt to confront these issues, the UK government introduced the Register of Overseas Entities in 2022. This measure mandated that offshore companies owning UK property declare their ultimate beneficial owners. However, trusts, powerful legal instruments that can own property through nominee directors or trustees, remain largely beyond the reach of disclosure requirements. Their beneficiaries can remain wholly concealed, protected by legal complexities that defy transparency. And so, the consequence is clear. A meaningful portion of the UK's housing stock is effectively owned by invisible offshore corporate entities. These owners enjoy minimal tax burdens, face no pressure to bring in used properties back onto the market, and contribute little to the communities around their holdings. The result is a distorting effect on a housing market already marked by scarcity, pushing prices relentlessly upward while locking out millions of young people hoping to buy their first home. The invisible hand of foreign money, protected behind layers of secrecy and legal structures, has reshaped not only London's skyline but the very fabric of British society. Homes have become investment vehicles, symbols of status, and fortresses of anonymity. As London grows ever more unaffordable, as young people face a future of soaring rents and shrinking opportunities, the shadows cast by anonymous foreign buyers lengthen too. An enduring reminder that the housing crisis is as much about money, power, and politics as it is about bricks and mortar. For the generation of young people who did manage, through family help or extraordinary discipline, to scrape together a deposit during the 2010s, there was a brief window of hope, a fragile glimmer in what had otherwise become a grim housing landscape. This hope was born from a remarkable period in British economic history, characterized by extraordinarily low interest rates that unlocked purchasing power on an unprecedented scale. Between 2009 and 2022, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the Bank of England held base interest rates near zero. For much of this period, rates hovered at 0.5% or lower, a historic anomaly designed to stimulate borrowing and spending in the face of economic stagnation. Mortgage rates, mirroring this policy, plummeted to record lows. For a time, it was possible to fix a mortgage at under 1% for 2 years. the likes of which the UK had never seen. For first-time buyers fortunate or determined enough to enter the market during this era, monthly mortgage payments became more manageable, often within reach of households on median incomes. The contrast with previous decades, when mortgage rates frequently ranged between 5 and 10%, was stark. Suddenly, the dream of homeownership, long considered unattainable for many, felt, if only briefly, achievable. But this brief season of euphoria proved deceptive. The very accommodative monetary policy that had offered temporary relief was never sustainable. Inflation, quietly dormant during much of the 2010s, began a slow but relentless return in the early 2020s, propelled by a complex mix of global supply chain disruptions, rising energy prices, and geopolitical upheavals. By late 2023, the Bank of England responded to mounting price pressures by raising the base rate decisively to 5.25%, the highest level in nearly a decade and a half. Mortgage lenders quickly adjusted, with the average 2-year fixed mortgage rate peaking above 6%. This rapid escalation was devastating to affordability. Consider a typical first-time buyer in 2024 borrowing £250,000. At 1.5%, their monthly repayment was around £750. But at 6%, that monthly cost more than doubled to over £1,600. This single rate cycle reversed the tentative gains of the previous decade, transforming what had seemed like a manageable financial commitment into a forbidding burden almost overnight. By 2025, the average mortgage rate for first-time buyers had settled somewhat, hovering around 5.4%. While lower than the peak, this rate remained nearly quadruple that of the low-interest era a decade earlier. The Bank of England estimated that by the end of 2027, approximately 4.4 million households who had benefited from fixed low-rate mortgages would need to remortgage at these higher rates. Among them, a harrowing 420,000 families faced monthly payment increases exceeding £500, amounts that could mean the difference between stable homeownership and financial distress. The affordability calculus changed dramatically. Monthly mortgage payments as a share of income surged from roughly 27% for first-time buyers in the low-interest period to approximately 37% in the high-rate environment, a shift that placed a crushing new strain on household finances. This rise in monthly payments came at a time when housing supply remained stubbornly tight, wages stagnant, and living costs escalating. The already enormous challenge of accumulating a deposit, often requiring multiples of average annual earnings, was now compounded by an equally punishing affordability problem on a monthly basis. The window of cheap money had briefly made ownership feel possible. Yet the sudden return to what are called normal interest rates revealed how illusory that sense of attainability had been. It was less a market recovery and more a stolen moment. Britain's housing market is, at its core, an asset price bubble inflated beyond what fundamentals such as wage growth, employment income, or regional economic activity would justify. Decades of policy decisions have pushed prices into a realm completely detached from average earnings. When you peel back the layer of extraordinary monetary conditions that define the 2010s, what you are left with is a market that is structurally and fundamentally unaffordable for a generation. A market where even owning a modest home requires a financial leap of faith, one that few working families can sustain without external help or extraordinary sacrifice. The statistics tell one story, a stark numerical portrait of a nation grappling with a housing crisis of unprecedented scale. But behind every percentage point and every data set lies a far more complex and deeply human narrative. The human cost of Britain's housing crisis stretches beyond the cold confines of charts and graphs, reaching into the everyday lives of millions of people whose hopes, dreams, and security are shaped, restricted, and often shattered by the availability and affordability of a place to call home. Over the past 2 decades, homeownership rates have slipped dramatically, particularly among younger generations. For those aged 35 to 44, the percentage owning their own home has fallen by 15 points since 2004. Among the youngest adults, aged 16 to 24, the decline is even more acute, down by 17 points over the same period. These figures reflect a seismic shift in the way generations experience housing in the UK. Once, it was almost a given that, by their early 30s, most British adults would have secured a mortgage and established roots in a property of their own. Now, that milestone is slipping further out of reach. The generation their parents expected to be settled and invested in property is instead renting, often in accommodation that is expensive, insecure, and fragmented well into their 40s. This trend is not just a matter of numbers. It has profound ripple effects that intertwine with economic stability, mental health, family life, and the fabric of society itself. Private renters in Britain, on average, hold significantly less wealth than homeowners of the same age. The relentless cost of renting siphons off an enormous portion of income, often 40% or more of take-home pay in major cities such as London, Manchester, and Birmingham. For many, this means living hand-to-mouth, with little room to build savings, invest in pensions, or buffer against life's unpredictable setbacks like unemployment or illness. The precarity of private renting doesn't just affect financial data, it erodes stability in everyday life. Renters move frequently, chasing affordable or available properties, which disrupts children's schooling, friendships, and long-term community ties. Frequent moves damage social cohesion and undermine the sense of belonging that roots people in place. Renters are also less likely to invest emotionally or financially in their homes, knowing that their tenure could be cut short with little notice, fostering a sense of impermanence that permeates their lives. Meanwhile, the strain on the social housing system proves equally stark. Across England, 1.2 million households languish on social housing waiting lists, families and individuals caught in a systemic bottleneck where demand drastically outstrips supply. Homelessness has surged to a record high. 290,000 people currently live without a permanent roof over their heads, staying in temporary accommodations, shelters, or, in the worst cases, on the streets. Local councils find themselves trapped in a costly cycle, spending billions to house homeless families in expensive private rentals, a stopgap that does nothing to address the underlying crisis. In stark contrast to the plight of younger generations, the over 65s hold a disproportionate share of the nation's housing wealth, an estimated £3.7 trillion in property, which amounts to 68% of all private housing equity in Britain. Many of these older homeowners live in properties with at least 2 spare bedrooms, homes that were once bustling with life, now often home only to a retired couple. The expected cycle of downsizing, freeing up larger family homes for younger families, has barely taken hold. Only about 3% of over 65s downsized in 2023. Compounding this stagnation is the issue of property tied up in probate. Every year, approximately 100,000 homes sit empty for between 1 and 2 years while estates are settled after the death of the occupant. These homes, often large family properties, could provide crucial supply if released sooner into the market, but remain in limbo, further tightening an already squeezed housing stock. It's important to stress this is not a critique aimed at older homeowners. They have made rational choices within a system structured in their favor. Yet the cumulative effect of these choices, viewed through the lens of public policy and housing supply, is a situation of extraordinary intergenerational inequity. The timing of one's birth now matters more than almost any other factor in determining whether property ownership is an achievable goal. For many born in the 1990s, homeownership remains an aspiration that may only be achievable too late in life to reap its full benefits. While this generation may inherit wealth from their parents, such inheritances often come in their 50s or 60s, years when buying a family home is less relevant, leaving them at a disadvantage during the crucial years of forming their own households. This is the stark bargain Britain has struck with its younger generations. Wait indefinitely, rent if you can, and hope that by the time you inherit, you still have the physical health and economic resilience to finally secure a home. This contract, a tacit social agreement laced with uncertainty and injustice, unfolds daily across millions of lives, as generations watch housing slip further out of reach, their futures shaped by forces often beyond their control. Since the dawn of Margaret Thatcher's tenure in 1979, every UK government, regardless of party, has solemnly pledged to resolve the nation's relentless housing crisis. Decades later, house prices keep climbing, social housing continues to shrink, and the dream of owning a home slips further from reach for millions. So why, despite promises and policies, has the crisis only deepened? The answer lies in a complex web of political, economic, and social dynamics, where the very solutions that could ease the crisis confront seemingly insurmountable barriers. The path to solving the housing crisis is not a mystery. Economists and housing experts have long converged on a handful of crucial reforms. First and foremost, build substantially more homes. Current UK government targets hover around 199,000 new homes per year. But research from the UK Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence suggests that to simply meet demand and close the widening supply gap, the country needs to deliver between 300,000 and 400,000 homes annually, an ambitious leap that has yet to be realized. Then, there is the controversial policy of right to buy. While it granted millions of council tenants the chance to own their homes, it simultaneously drained the stock of affordable social housing at a pace far outstripping government replacement programs. Even now, this scheme continues to chip away at social housing, making it harder for those on lower incomes to find secure, affordable accommodation. Another frequently proposed solution is imposing punitive taxes on empty homes, properties that sit unused for long periods, sometimes years, thereby pushing owners to either rent them out or sell, increasing supply in a highly constrained market. Alongside this, calls grow louder to unravel the shrouded opacity of property ownership in London, where foreign investors often conceal holdings through offshore companies, parking capital in prime real estate without occupying or letting these homes. Tax reform looms large in the list of remedies. The current tax system disproportionately favors landlords, allowing them to claim deductions and reliefs that first-time buyers cannot access. This imbalance nudges investment towards buy-to-let properties instead of affordable home ownership. Many experts advocate shifting the tax burden away from everyday homeowners and towards landlords and speculators to level the playing field. Some of these reforms are bureaucratically straightforward, political will permitting, while others require a degree of courage and consensus rare in a system shackled by entrenched interests. And therein lies the political catch. Come 2025, more than 60% of adult Britons own their own homes. For the majority, their property is not just shelter. It is their most valuable asset, their primary pension, the solid foundation of financial security they have painstakingly built over years, sometimes decades. Any government that seriously proposes policies threatening to diminish those house prices is effectively telling its core voters that their life savings, their financial futures, could shrink. It's a politically perilous promise to make. This is why no political party in modern British history has ever won a general election campaigning on a platform to make houses cheaper. The voters who participate most consistently in elections skew heavily toward homeowners. Renters, often younger and more transient, tend to vote less reliably. This demographic imbalance creates a feedback loop. Policies favor homeowners, who are incentivized to protect their property's value even if it means exclusionary zoning and opposition to new development on their doorsteps. The only force capable of shifting this complex equation over the long term may be demographic change and the slow redistribution of wealth. As inherited wealth passes between generations, political pressures might realign. New political coalitions could emerge, prioritizing affordable housing over asset protection. However, for the millions of young people in their late 20s and 30s in 2025, many renting insecurely in pricey urban centers, struggling to raise families within tight budgets, this distant prospect offers little solace. They have done everything society told them to do: excel in education, work hard, save diligently. Yet the door to home ownership remains frustratingly closed. A luxury postponed indefinitely in a market rigged not by chance but by entrenched economic and political forces. They are trapped in a waiting game, where the rules favor those with existing assets and connections, while the dream of owning a home fades into an echo of another generation's promises, not yet fulfilled. If this video gave you a clearer picture of why Britain's housing crisis is so deeply entrenched and so deliberately maintained, then subscribe to the Paper Trail. Every week, we follow the money behind the headlines. Next week, how billionaires hide wealth legally, the rules they play by and the rules you pay by. Hit subscribe and we'll see you there.